What's up, fellow pilots? It's Caleb here from Air 101, and today we're going to be talking about 6 more things that you should always check on your certificate of insurance. This is part 2 of a 2-part series. If you haven't watched the first part, no worries, you can start right here and then watch the first video afterwards. Now let's jump right into it. Number 1, make sure depending on what coverage you purchase, whether it's liability only, all risk not in motion, or all risk flight and ground, is actually correct on your certificate of insurance. I have in the past gotten a call from a possible client and they told me that they got a cheaper quote elsewhere for full all risk flight and ground coverage. So I asked them, do you mind if I take a look at the quote? And when I looked at the quote, I found out that the quote was actually only for all risk not in motion coverage. If they had gone ahead with this quote, they would have realized when looking at the certificate of insurance that in fact they had actually purchased the wrong coverage, not the coverage that they actually wanted to purchase. The reason why I want to bring this up is that I want to make sure that you check your certificate of insurance and make sure it actually has the coverage that you thought you purchased. Also, I have seen in the past that another broker had put all risk flight and ground on the certificate of insurance, but then the possible client asked me to review their policy. And when I reviewed their policy, I found out that they had all risk not in motion coverage, not all risk flight and ground coverage, and it had been this way for 4 years. So this is why it's best to correlate between the certificate of insurance and the aviation insurance policy and make sure that they really do match. Number 2, double check that the amount of seats on the certificate of insurance is correct. Remember, the seat number that's on the policy is excluding the pilot. So for example, if you have a Cessna 172 that has 4 seats in it, then the policy would only insure 3 seats on the aircraft. The reason why this is because the pilot cannot sue themselves. But if you want to know how to make sure that the pilot gets some bodily injury coverage, then stay tuned because I'm going to be talking about this in a future video. Number 3, confirm that your deductible on the certificate of insurance matches the deductible that you were quoted. And if it has changed, ask your aviation insurance broker why. Also, sometimes you'll notice on your certificate of insurance there's an in-motion deductible, a not in-motion deductible, and even possibly a more deductible. I am also going to be explaining these different types of deductibles in a future video. Number 4, look at the approved pilot section on your certificate of insurance. Make sure that your name is listed in this section before you start flying your aircraft. If your name is not listed in this section on your certificate of insurance and you were to fly your aircraft and have an accident, most likely there would be no coverage afforded under your policy. This is why it's best to call your aviation insurance broker when you notice things like this and have it fixed right away. Also, if you have an open pilot warranty on your policy, it should be listed in this section as well. Number 5, looking at your territorial limits on your certificate of insurance. Please note that territorial limits can vary from insurance company to insurance company. Become familiar with these territorial limits and understand where you can actually fly your aircraft. A couple things to note when you're looking at the territorial limits on your certificate of insurance is sometimes insurance companies exclude certain areas, such as, for example, the certificate that I put up on the screen, where you can see that Alaska is excluded. In most cases, it's not an issue for the insurance company to add Alaska onto the policy, but they want to know what your experience is, what your plans are going to be in flying in Alaska, etc. Also, if you do plan on flying in Alaska, usually the insurance company is going to give you sub-limit liability coverages. For example, if you have a 2 million combined single liability limit, they will sub-limit your policy when you're in Alaska, for example, to 1 million third-party liability and 300,000 per passenger. Also, one last thing I want to talk about territorial limits is in most policies, you'll see that Mexico is covered under the territorial limits. But please note that if you are traveling to Mexico, in most cases, you will also need a separate policy that's in Spanish. Now, this policy that you can purchase is relatively cheap, but it is a very, very important policy that you should know about and you should purchase if you're flying to Mexico. Number 6, looking at your loss payee on your certificate of insurance. If you are required to have your loss payee on there because you've taken out a bank loan to be able to buy your aircraft, make sure that it's listed on the certificate of insurance. What this means that in the event of a loss, the insurance company is going to make sure that the loss payee or the bank is paid out first prior to paying you the remaining funds if the aircraft was written off. But here's one thing to look out for is year after year of renewing your policy, if at some point that you do pay off the loan to the bank, make sure that this has been removed off your certificate of insurance. The reason being is if the bank has not been removed, it could possibly draw out the claim process because the aviation insurance company is going to want to have proof to show that the bank loan was really paid off prior to paying out the funds to you. Also, one last very important thing I want to talk about is make sure the information that you put on the application matches the quote that you get. And then make sure the information on the quote that you go ahead with matches your certificate of insurance. And then make sure the information that is on the certificate of insurance matches your policy. This is very important to double check all these things because sometimes the aviation insurance company misses something, sometimes the aviation insurance broker misses something, and sometimes you may also miss something on there as well. This is why it's best that we all work together to make sure that you get the right documents with the right coverage that you wanted and paid for. Stay safe, stay current, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.